The Lone Rider and the Stolen Gold. The sun, a fiery orb, dipped low, casting long, skeletal shadows across the undulating hills as Dusty Callahan rode. His mare, Rusty, a sorrel with a white blaze, moved with an easy rhythm, her hooves kicking up puffs of ochre dust that lingered in the still, warm air. A lone hawk circled high above, its cry a thin whisper carried on the wind, the only sound to break the vast silence. Dusty's wide-brimmed hat shaded his eyes, but his gaze remained fixed on the horizon, searching for anything out of place. His thoughts, however, were not on the fading light or the endless expanse of the wilderness. They were back in Red Rock Gulch, on the worried faces of the townsfolk, etched with fear and uncertainty. The memory of Mrs. Henderson's tear-filled eyes, the way old Silas had clutched his empty coin purse, fueled a quiet fire within him. 3 days had passed since the raid on the bank, a brazen act that had stripped the small community of its hard-earned savings. Dusty hadn't been in town, but the news had reached him quickly, along with the desperate plea for help. He adjusted the worn leather reins, the scent of horse sweat and sagebrush filling his nostrils. Justice, he mused, was a debt that always came due. These outlaws, whoever they were, had ridden in like a storm and vanished just as quickly, leaving behind only chaos and despair. But Dusty Callahan wasn't one to let such things go unanswered. His kind heart, often mistaken for weakness by strangers, held an unyielding core when it came to righting wrongs. He might be a quiet man, more comfortable with the honest toil of ranch life than the rough-and-tumble world of law enforcement, but the plight of his community stirred something deep within him. "We'll find girl," he murmured, patting Rusty's neck. The mare flicked an ear, as if understanding. He pictured the glint of gold, the heavy sacks the robbers had made off with. He pictured the trail, faint but still discernible, leading west into these very hills. He had promised the townsfolk he would retrieve their money, and Dusty Callahan always kept his promises. A resolute glint entered his eyes. He would ride until he found them, no matter how far, no matter how long. He would make things right. Smoke on the mountain. The sun, a fiery orb climbing higher, beat down on Dusty's back. He'd been riding since before dawn, the only sound for miles the rhythmic thud of Thunder's hooves and the creak of saddle leather. His gaze, ever scanning the horizon, snagged on something subtle, almost imperceptible, high on the craggy face of Mount Cinder. A wisp of gray, barely distinguishable from the hazy blue of the sky, drifted lazily upwards. Smoke. His heart gave a little jolt, a mix of apprehension and grim resolve. Could it be them? The bandits he'd been tracking for weeks? He pulled Thunder to a halt, dismounting quietly. "Easy, boy," he murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "Looks like we've got company." He secured Thunder to a sturdy juniper, then began his ascent, keeping low, moving with the practiced stealth of a man who'd spent his life in the wilds. The incline was steep, loose scree shifting under his boots, but Dusty was light on his feet. He used every rock, every gnarled pine, as cover. The smell of pine needles and sun-baked earth filled his nostrils. As he climbed higher, the air grew thinner, cooler, carrying with it a faint scent of burning wood, not the acrid smell of a hastily doused campfire, but something cleaner, like a hearth. He reached a narrow ledge, peering cautiously through a screen of stunted oaks. Below, nestled in a small, surprisingly fertile hollow, was a cabin. Not a ramshackle hideout, but a small, well-maintained structure, smoke curling gently from its stone chimney. A neat pile of split logs sat beside the door, and a small patch of tilled earth, green with young shoots, hinted at a garden. No horses, no obvious signs of a gang. This wasn't a bandit camp. This was someone's home. The mountain woman. The smoke was what caught Dusty's attention first, a thin, pale tendril curling against the deep green of the pines. He'd been tracking the bandit gang for days, the trail growing colder with each passing mile, and the thought of another human presence out here was a jolt. He dismounted, leading his horse, Sundance, through the dense undergrowth, the scent of wood smoke growing stronger, overlaid with something else, a hint of herbs, perhaps, and the earthy smell of damp soil. He rounded a cluster of ancient firs and saw her. She was kneeling by a small, crackling fire, stirring a pot suspended over the flames. Her back was to him, but even from this distance, her presence was striking. She wore practical buckskin leggings and a tunic of similar material, her dark hair braided and tucked beneath a leather cap. A rifle leaned against a nearby log, almost an extension of her. A twig snapped under Dusty's boot. She moved with astonishing speed, fluid and silent. One moment she was tending the fire, the next she was on her feet, a glint of polished steel in her hand. A long hunting knife, its blade wickedly sharp, pointed directly at his chest. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, assessed him without a flicker of fear. There was no panic, only a fierce, unwavering caution. Dusty stopped dead, his hands slowly rising, palms open to show they were empty. "Easy there, ma'am," he said, his voice low and calm. "Didn't mean to startle you. Just passing through." Her gaze remained locked on him, the knife held steady. "This ain't a passing through kind of place, stranger." Her voice was clear, with an edge of hardened independence, like granite carved by the wind. She wasn't shouting, wasn't threatening, but the implicit warning was unmistakable. Sundance whickered softly behind him, sensing the tension. "Dusty Callahan," he offered, taking another careful step back. "Just a lone rider. Lost my way a bit." He gestured vaguely to the surrounding wilderness. She didn't lower the knife. A secret past and a shared goal. The scent of pine needles and damp earth filled the small cabin as Lily finally spoke, her voice softer than Dusty expected. "My name's Lily Maeve. I came out here to get away from a life that wasn't mine." She picked at a loose thread on her worn skirt. "I was a mail-order bride, promised to a man I'd never met, a rancher twice my age with a cruel reputation. When I saw him, saw the way he looked at me like I was property, I ran. Didn't even look back." She met his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "These mountains offered me freedom, a chance to be my own woman." Dusty listened, a quiet understanding settling over him. Her courage resonated with his own pursuit of justice. "I'm after a gang of bank robbers," he finally said, pulling a crumpled, wanted poster from his saddlebag. "Jed, Snake-Eye, Thompson and his crew. They hit the Willow Creek bank and disappeared into these hills." He pointed to the crude drawing of Thompson's gaunt face. "They killed a good man, a friend of mine, in the process." Lily studied the poster, her brow furrowed. "Snake-Eye, huh? Heard whispers about him. He's known for being slippery." Her eyes, sharp and keen, scanned the rough map on the poster. "They'll be heading for the old miners' trails, probably aiming for the Blackfoot Pass. It's treacherous, full of hidden caves and steep ravines." A thoughtful expression crossed her face. "I know these mountains like the back of my hand, every crag and every creek." She looked up at Dusty, a new light in her gaze. "If you're set on finding them, I can guide you." The shared purpose hung in the air, a silent agreement forged between a man seeking justice and a woman embracing her freedom. Paths converge. The crackling fire painted shifting shadows across Dusty's face as he watched Lily mend a tear in her buckskin tunic. The rhythmic pull of her needle was the only sound apart from the chirping crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. "My ma used to say a good stitch was a promise," he mused, leaning back on his saddle. "A promise to keep things together." Lily glanced up, a faint smile touching her lips. "My ma taught me how to hunt. Said a full belly was a promise you made to yourself." She paused, then added, "What was your home like, Dusty?" He described a small ranch, sun-baked and dusty, but filled with the scent of his mother's baking and the lowing of cattle. "Simple, I guess. But it was ours. Always dreamed of having my own spread, a place where I could raise a family, maybe a few good horses." He looked at her, the firelight catching the warmth in his eyes. "What about you, Lily? What do you dream of?" She considered his question, her gaze drifting to the vast, star-peppered sky. "Freedom, mostly. To wake when the sun does, to follow the deer tracks wherever they lead. And, to find a place where I belong, truly belong, without having to fight for every breath." Her voice, usually so sharp and resolute, softened with a wistful edge. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of burning logs. Dusty found himself drawn to the quiet strength in her, the way she carried herself, even in repose. She wasn't just pretty, she was resilient, like a desert flower blooming against all odds. He felt a protective urge stir within him, a desire to help her find that belonging she yearned for. Lily, in turn, found herself relaxing in his presence. His quiet observations, his genuine interest, were a balm to her often guarded spirit. He wasn't like the men she'd known, full of bluster or with grasping hands. Dusty was kind. A rare and precious thing in this wild land. A nascent feeling, warm and unfamiliar, began to unfurl in her chest, a quiet understanding passing between them in the glow of the campfire. Blocked trail. The sun, already arcing low, cast long, distorted shadows across the canyon floor. Dusty, leading his horse Red, scanned the dusty ground, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lily, nimble as a mountain goat, walked a little ahead, her eyes sharp and constantly moving. Suddenly, she stopped, a hand held up. "Look here, Dusty," she said, pointing with a worn leather-gloved finger. "Fresh." He knelt, examining the deep, uneven hoof prints pressed into the dry earth. No mistaking the distinct, crude horseshoe pattern he'd learned to recognize over the past few days. "That's them. They're close." A ripple of tension went through him, a mix of grim determination and a flicker of hope that the stolen gold might still be within reach. Before they could discuss it further, a low grumble echoed through the canyon, growing rapidly into a roaring crescendo. The ground vibrated beneath their feet. Lily's eyes widened, and she instinctively grabbed Dusty's arm, pulling him back just as a cascade of rocks, large and small, began to tumble from the cliff face above. Dust billowed, choking the air, and a deafening crash reverberated as a massive boulder settled squarely across the narrow trail ahead, effectively sealing their path. "Blast it all!" Dusty coughed, wiping dust from his eyes. The trail was completely impassable. Lily, ever practical, was already assessing the damage. "We'll need the pickaxe and that shovel from your pack." He retrieved the tools, handing the shovel to Lily. The air was thick with the smell of pulverized stone. Together, they began to chip away at the smaller rocks around the edges of the colossal obstruction. Dusty, with his powerful shoulders, leveraged the pickaxe, sending chips flying, while Lily, precise and efficient, shoveled away the debris, creating a small working space. Sweat plastered strands of hair to her temples, and her muscles strained with each movement, but she never faltered. Dusty admired her unwavering resolve, a quiet strength that matched his own in a different way. The rhythmic clang of metal on stone and the scrape of the shovel filled the twilight, a testament to their combined effort. Slowly, painstakingly, a narrow passage began to emerge. The bandits' camp. The scent of stale wood smoke and unwashed men hung heavy in the air, a pungent beacon drawing Dusty and Lily closer. They crouched behind a gnarled juniper, its branches offering a sparse screen against the harsh afternoon sun. Below them, nestled in a shallow canyon, lay the bandit camp. Four crude tents formed a semicircle around a sputtering fire, where a pot bubbled ominously. Across from the tents, a makeshift pen held a handful of scrawny horses. "There he is," Lily whispered, her voice tight. She pointed a slender finger towards a burly man gnawing on a piece of jerky by the fire. His eyes, even from this distance, seemed to glint with an unpleasant keenness. "Jed Snake-Eye Thompson." Dusty felt a familiar knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach, but his resolve hardened. "All right," Dusty murmured, his gaze sweeping over the camp's layout. "We need to separate them. Get Snake Eye away from the money, wherever he's stashed it." He turned to Lily, a plan already forming. "I'll go for the strongbox once they're distracted. Can you make some noise on the far side?" Lily's lips quirked. Noise, or something a bit more convincing? Her eyes, usually so guarded, held a mischievous glint. A smoke signal, perhaps. Something that says, trouble, without screaming ambush. Dusty nodded, a small smile touching his lips. He knew he could count on her. "Perfect. Give me about 10 minutes after you start it." With a silent nod, Lily melted away, moving with the grace of a shadow through the brush. Dusty watched her go, a flicker of admiration warming him. He counted slowly, his hand resting on the hilt of his revolver, the familiar weight a small comfort. The minutes dragged, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, a thin plume of gray smoke began to rise from the opposite ridge, followed by another, thicker column. It wasn't a wildfire, but it was enough. A shout erupted from the camp, followed by the clatter of boots. Dusty saw Snake Eye bellowing orders, his men scrambling for their horses, their attention fixed on the growing smoke. This was his chance. Victory and a lingering question. Dusty's yell ripped through the quiet evening, a primal sound that shook the leaves on the aspens. He burst into the clearing, a blur of denim and determination, his rifle a familiar weight in his hands. The three outlaws, caught mid-deal over a flickering fire, scattered like startled quail. Jed Snake Eye Thompson, his greasy hat askew, fumbled for his sidearm, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and panic. Just as Thompson began to raise his pistol, a high-pitched shriek echoed from the tree-line opposite. Lily, a whirlwind of motion, launched herself from behind a thick pine, a cloud of dried leaves and pine needles erupting in her wake. Her distraction was perfectly timed, a chaotic flurry that drew every bandit's gaze. It was all Dusty needed. He tackled the closest thug, sending him sprawling into the campfire, embers hissing as they met denim. Thompson, momentarily disoriented, found himself staring down the barrel of Dusty's rifle. "Drop it, Snake Eye," Dusty's voice was low, laced with an unfamiliar edge of steel. The bandit's hand trembled, his face a mask of defeat as his pistol clattered to the dirt. Lily, emerging from the undergrowth, quickly bound the remaining two outlaws with their own belts, her movements swift and efficient. The stolen money, in a canvas sack, lay innocently by the extinguished fire. The distant jingle of spurs and the creak of saddle leather announced the sheriff's arrival. Dusty watched as the lawman, a grizzled veteran with tired eyes, took Thompson and his henchmen into custody. The stolen money was accounted for, the threat neutralized. Yet, as the last wagon disappeared down the winding trail, Dusty's gaze drifted to Lily. The firelight played across her strong features, illuminating the fierce spirit he'd come to admire. A warmth bloomed in his chest, distinct from the adrenaline, a quiet realization that victory felt hollow without her by his side. A new question, more potent than any bandit hunt, began to form in his heart. A new path together. The campfire's dance of light flickered across Dusty's pensive face. After a long silence spent gazing at the embers, he finally turned to Lily. "Lily," he began, his voice a quiet anchor, "I understand how deeply you treasure this mountain, your autonomy. And I respect that more than I can articulate." He paused, gathering his resolve. "But I can no longer envision riding away from here without you. I want a life with you, Lily. A life woven together. Will you join me?" Lily's pulse hammered. She met Dusty's gaze, seeing the profound kindness, the genuine devotion shining in his every action. This was no fleeting whim, no hollow vow. This was a man laying bare his very soul. The untamed spirit within her recoiled at the prospect of abandoning her sanctuary, her familiar crags and valleys. Yet, a gentler, deeper murmur spoke of camaraderie, of a future not solitary, but shared with someone who truly perceived her. Her eyes swept over the rugged terrain, the only home she'd ever known, before returning to Dusty. His hand reached for hers, warm and steadfast. A soft smile touched her lips. "Dusty Callahan," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion, "you are an obstinate man." She squeezed his hand. "And I am equally so. But you've unveiled a different sort of freedom to me. A liberation found in trust, in shared burdens, in love." She drew a deep breath, the mountain air suddenly tasting sweeter, richer. "Yes, Dusty. I'll come with you. Let's forge that life." A wave of profound relief washed over Dusty, illuminating his face with a radiant smile. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Rusty, laden with their modest, combined belongings, waited patiently. Dusty helped Lily into the saddle, then swung up behind her, their hands instinctively interlocking. As Rusty began his careful descent down the winding mountain path, the rising sun painted the sky in magnificent hues of orange and gold. Lily leaned back against Dusty, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, the reassuring strength of his arm. The familiar peaks receded behind them, no longer a sanctuary, but a cherished memory. Ahead lay the boundless plains, an uncharted future, and the unwavering promise of a new journey, together.